But the act of empathy and the ability to make choices based on how you affect the world and the people around you, that is learned.
Welcome to the Relational Parenting Podcast. I'm Jennifer Hayes, a parent coach and 20-year childcare veteran. Each week, I sit down with my own father, Rick Hayes, and discuss the complicated issues that parents face today, as well as some of the oldest questions in the book. From the latest research and the framework of my relational parenting method, we offer thought-provoking solutions to your deepest parenting struggles, or in other words, how to parent your kids without losing your mind or traumatizing theirs. Added bonuses include intergenerational wounding discussions and guest childcare experts. We will also start taking your parenting questions in episode 5, so be sure to comment with your biggest questions or email me directly at jenny@jennyb.co. Let's get started. Hello, connection over control. This might be my favorite week, you guys. This is a big one. This is the number one pillar of relational parenting. When we prioritize our relationship with our child, even in the hardest moments, our child learns to trust us. The strongest bonds are built in the most harrowing of times, and this applies to our kids too. In this episode, we talk about the importance of spending joyful time creating connection with our kids as well. This episode lays the foundation for everything else to come, and I am beyond excited to share it with you.
All right, so we are here today talking about, our topic today is using connection over control in our parenting. So how to parent through difficult moments using connection and healthy conflict skills instead of power and control. So in relational parenting, our biggest goal is to maintain the connection in the relationship, even when things are really hard or we're in conflict or our kid is having really big emotions about something that we don't think warrants big emotions or whatever it might be. Maintaining that connection instead of worrying about getting a behavior to stop or getting a specific response from our kids. So we're prioritizing the connection during the hard moments. The reason that this is so important and why it's one of my pillars of relational parenting is that we create bonds and trust, deeper bonds and trust during the hard times, during conflict, than we do even in the joyful moments. So creating joyful moments and connecting with your children and building your relationship with your children in that way is also extremely important and necessary for any relationship, is experiencing things and finding joy together. But the place that we really root down in our relationships into trust and lifelong bond is through moments of difficulty or really big emotions or really big behaviors when we're talking about kids. So it creates trust and deeper bonds, and we're adding to our children's confidence as well, because when we allow our children to have their big feelings, and especially when they're small and they have big feelings, which usually leads to big behaviors like tantrums or screaming or hitting or any of those things. When we allow those things to happen when they're small and we greet them with understanding and calm and curiosity and problem solving when they're little, then they are able to feel safe in their environment. They're able to feel like they can be honest about their big feelings, and they learn through your example and through teaching. Once they're calm, they learn that just because they have a big emotion, it doesn't mean that they can also have big behaviors. And so by the time they're big enough to cause harm with their behaviors, they've learned not to do that. They've learned healthier coping skills, which means that you, the parent, get a child who feels safe, heard, and understood. And that means they're going to cooperate with you much easier than a child who feels scared or powerless or disconnected from the most important person in their life. And it also, just fun fact, it actually takes longer to have the power struggle with your kid, to have the argument, to shut them down, to send them to their room, to force the coat or the shoes onto their feet. It takes longer and more energy and more frustration to do all of that than it does to take a deep breath, regulate yourself, and calmly comfort your child, reassure your child, and then problem solve together. It feels hard and it sounds harder, but it's actually takes in general less time to do that. And it keeps you connected and doesn't cause a break in the relationship. And those repetitive breaks when our kids are really young are detrimental to the parent-child relationship. And then as the child grows, those breaks just keep growing. So
yeah, sometimes sometimes there is an urgency, right? Kid's about to run out in front of a car. No, that's the time to grab them. Other times, you have to. How do I want to handle this so that to keep things calm, and get through it as quickly as possible. It takes a little practice to get, and I know I've made the wrong choice, made a choice I wish I'd made different, dealing with something right now, as opposed to spending an extra minute to get done and then learn. They don't so much learn it right then. You're not passing on the regulation and right then. It's when the kids. I remember your brother. He'd fall and watch other little kids. They'll fall and skin their knee, and they get up and they turn and look at their parents when they're real little to see how they should react. Right? It doesn't. They don't learn it right there when you're on the way to church or whatever work. They it kind of it consolidates with them the next time that happens, and now they have a memory to work on. The idea is to get as many of those kind of memories as opposed to come here, put on your coat, let's go. I'm the big person, you're the little person, do it my way, kind of stuff. And it gets easier as they get older. You don't have to keep doing that.
Well, and that's a really great example, because that's one of like the classic ones that most people know about, is when a kid falls down, like they look at the people around them to see like, oh, something big just happened. Like, am I scared? Am I hurt? Am I whatever? And that's such a great example. And they're doing that. It's so obvious in that moment. And that's such a great example. And that's why a lot of people know about it, but they're doing that 24/7. Like, even when they're playing, they've got one ear on you, or they've got one eyeball on you, or whatever.
Little
like
tape recorders.
Yeah. Like we always joke, our moms always joke, I've got eyes in the back of my head, no, kids are like, how did you know what I was doing or whatever? And I think kids have eyes in the back of their head, and kids have, like, they don't even know that they're doing it, but they're absorbing literally everything around them. And so they are constantly watching their parents, their caregivers, and mimicking. And I mean, just think about babies when you're holding a baby in front of you and you're face to face and you're trying to get the baby to, raise their eyebrows or stick their tongue out or
stick
smile
its tongue out.
or
Yeah.
giggle. Like babies, they try to copy you. They mimic you. That's how they learn how to live. And so if every time your kid has a big emotion and is letting it out through crying or yelling or saying no or hitting you or their sibling or themselves or whatever it is, if every time they do something like that, you react with like urgency and freaking out and like trying to stop them and whatever, that's what they're going to learn to do. And so those tantrums are never going to go away, though, unless it's fear based, unless they're afraid to throw a tantrum. But the way that they handle their own emotions is going to follow them into adulthood, and that's how they're going to handle their emotions in all of their relationships and with themselves for the rest of their lives, unless they were to, get therapy or a coach or whatever and learn to do it differently.
Unlearn some of the stuff as children. What we tend to parent, unless we work at it, we tend to parent with what we picked up as kids. And that's why people are always saying, "Oh, I'm never going to be like my parent in some way or another," right? And then you catch yourself being like your parent. I can't believe that just came out of my mouth. And best not to put it in the head in the first place. And even if it's not perfect, as little as possible. Working at it makes the world a better place. Because you don't have to be perfect at it. Progress, not perfection, kind of thing.
Well, you said that they have, in that moment when you respond calmly and then teach, once everyone has been heard and everyone has calmed down, and then you take a moment to teach or problem solve with your child.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily then that the next time they have a big emotion, they're going to just magically be able to handle it. But what's going to happen through repetition is they're going to start building those memories, those, and that will become a habit. And that will turn into their ability to self-regulate eventually. You also said something else that I wanted to make sure and expand on, which was the alternative being like you're trying to get in the car, you're late for school, kid won't get their shoes on or whatever, and you just pick them up, throw them under your arm and carry them and get them in the car seat and like just physically like force them. And you're not necessarily hurting them, but you are taking away their choice, their voice, their autonomy, all of
It's
those
a power
things.
thing. Yeah.
And you're taking, you're controlling them. You are making them powerless. You are forcing them to do something. And one, that's terrifying to anyone. And two, that also with repetition will teach that child that if they don't want to do something, the only force that's going to make them do it is someone outside of themselves or a situation outside of themselves that forces them to do it. And instead of having a conversation with the caregiver about why we need to go, like here's A, B, and C, or here's what's happening, here's the timeline, here's why, and really like describing what's going on, why we need to get there. School is, they don't just wait on one person. There's a group of students there ready to learn, and we need to respect everyone's time, right? And so really, really giving, even a 3-year-old can understand that conversation, and giving them the why behind what we're doing will teach them to be able to have discipline and put effort into things and respect other people's time when they're older. And the choice is up to them. There's no one forcing them to do things. If they don't ever learn how to do that when they're young, they're going to really struggle with it when they're older and when they're adults, and they're going to, be flaky or just not show up, or, all the different things.
I think that's a real important point, is you want to be careful about putting yourself in the position of being at the mercy of a 2-year-old in the middle of a meltdown to make good choices. Nobody makes good choices in the middle of a meltdown or an
Right.
upset. But you do want to teach them to make good choices, and let them know it's their choice how this ends or whatever. But here are the criteria, and to some age appropriate extent, got a nap. To an age appropriate extent, you get them to buy in to the program that's at hand.
Yeah, that the buy-in, the intrinsic motivation that we want. Like I personally don't have the intrinsic motivation, the level of intrinsic motivation and discipline that I wish I had, and
Yeah.
I've been an adult for a very long time, and I've done my own, taken responsibility for that, and done my own work with that and whatnot. But I know that growing up, whether it was through your parenting, I don't have like a specific memory about any of that, but I know that like I was, there was school, and I know that it was like you needed to show up on time, and if you were tardy, there were consequences, and if and I was kind of always externally motivated growing up, and I still am today. I'm very motivated by the expectations of others, and but as I've grown as an adult, I also have like, I know people who have not respected my time, and that's been really frustrating. And so I don't do that to other people now. That's intrinsically motivated in me to not waste other people's times and to show up on time for appointments and et cetera, outside of like the consequence of like, oh, your appointment's going to be canceled or you're going to be charged, whatever, like a late fee or whatever it is. But I've developed in adulthood the intrinsic motivation to not waste other people's time because it's been done to me.
Being considerate.
Yeah, being considerate, but that can start so much younger. Like that can be taught. A lot of parenting, especially when I was a kid, a lot of parenting was, you're given a choice between do what I say or there's a consequence. Like that was the choice that kids were given, was you have two choices: do it this way or you're in trouble. And that's not a real choice, right? There's no actual choice there for the child.
That's right.
Giving choices is giving two actual like equal choices, neither of them being a punishment. And I think that type of parenting, led to me being that type of parenting, that type of just like the like social environment was set up that way too. And there was a lot of like external motivation. I was not an internally motivated child. At all. I wanted to please people. I wanted to do the right thing so that I would be a good kid and show up on time and get good grades and blah blah blah. And it externally created good circumstances for me. So like the goal was achieved, but then as an adult who wasn't being told what to do all the time, wasn't being handed a list and a next step, and I had to like go out in the world and create my life, I was just like, what do I do now? There's nobody to just
not prepared
please and show up for. Yeah,
it's funny how our personalities are formed. You studied it more than I have, but people who are, I wouldn't know how to create an intrinsically motivated person, really, because I'm like a dutiful employee, It makes it hard for me to be a entrepreneur like you, because it's, I'm looking for a system to plug myself into and excel in, rather than heck what the world thinks, I'll make my own system.
Yeah.
Interesting.
When I've had business ideas since I was 25, so like 8, 9 years now. And I think partially I wasn't ready to be an entrepreneur, and I dabbled, like little side gigs while I had full-time jobs or whatever. But I've always felt like something was missing. I've always felt like there was something else I was meant to be doing. And so, I had lots of business ideas over those years, but I think I finally found the one I'm, meant to be doing, because it's what I've been passionate about my whole life. But it has not been super easy. Like, it hasn't been easy at all. It's been like, because I grew up following rules, following a template of what life is supposed to look like, and doing all of the right things, and then realizing my level of life satisfaction was like gone. And figuring out what I actually want my life to look like, and what I actually want to do with it, and all of those things. And that's been just in the last 4 or 5 years or so. And so that's been so hard to break out of that, like plug into a system and just do it the way it's been done, So that's, an added benefit of not just keeping the relationship healthy with your kids, not just creating lifelong bonds and emotional intelligence for your children to have throughout their lives, but also we're creating intrinsic motivation. And you said a minute ago that you weren't sure how to do that. And the secret is empathy. So when we show empathy, when we set the example of giving empathy to our children then become capable of being empathetic. And the way that you become intrinsically motivated is knowing how something feels when it happens to you and not wanting to do that to other people. So, or understanding a concept of how it feels or how it hurts or whatever to someone else, and then deciding you get to decide what kind of person you're going to be. And so, if children are given the chance, especially from a young age, they are given the example of what empathy looks like and how they should be treated, and because how our parents treat us set us up for our expectations from friends and partners in life. If we give our kids a really strong example of being treated well, being loved, being understood, being empathized with, then our children naturally will learn that, and they will start to catch on to that and be able to give that to other people. We don't come out empathetic people. Like we aren't born with empathy. Empathy is learned. And there are, some people will argue that my kid is super sensitive to everyone around him, and he feels everything that we feel. And yes, like there are levels of sensitive and tuned in that different children have built into their personalities. But the act of empathy and the ability to make choices based on how you affect the world and the people around you, that is learned.
Yeah, I agree. That's an important distinction. Being sensitive is different than attributing sensitivity to other people and recognizing that, understanding the value of recognizing that. A psychopath or whatever, I'm sure they have, and I'm throwing around terms I don't understand technically, but they have an emotional life. Uh, I think it is psychopathy, psychopath that doesn't see any, doesn't have any emotional. Well, I guess maybe that is, they don't have any emotional attachment to other people or something. Something where you can have an emotion, but you don't necessarily understand that other people are having exactly the same emotions you are and reacting to things like you probably do. Difference between us and them. I guess babies do that too. You have to learn the difference between yourself and other people.
Yeah, because you're a common example of a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old hitting a younger sibling, and the reaction is, oh, no, don't do that. You're going to hurt her. You're going to hurt them. They don't necessarily understand what that means.
Yeah.
And you can even say,
of course I was.
and you can even say, like, do you like it when you get kicked? If maybe the sister has kicked them accidentally, or they have a friend who has kicked them. You can even like bring up that concept and be like, do you like it when you get kicked? And they'll be like, no. And they'll be like, well, she doesn't like it when she gets kicked. And they might logically understand that, but emotionally, that connection is still not there. Like their brain isn't capable of it yet. But through repetition and setting the example, they will learn it. But only if they're taught.
Yeah.
So,
and that's a good example, I think, with something serious. A 3-year-old hitting a 2-year-old, there's a minimal amount of damage probably going to happen there, but you want your child to learn not to do that by the time they're 20. Right. And so that's where your regulation as a parent, where it's handy to be more mature than your child. That's a word we haven't used, I guess, mature maybe. But to take a chance to engage your kid and get some cooperation, explain why for the millionth time, maybe, but explain and get things calmed down and show them how to do that.
Yeah, and if it is the millionth time, you involve your child in that conversation and that problem solving, and ask questions instead of just preaching, talking at them again and again and again. I've said this 800 times. Like, once everyone has calmed down, and we're going to walk through some age-specific examples of how to handle these situations in a second. But once everyone has calmed down, instead of being like, we don't hit because that hurts people, remember? Instead of saying that, because they know, and they don't have self-control at certain ages, and it's going to happen.
That's right.
So being like, remember, don't you remember? Like, that's just going to cause shame, which was our last episode. But instead, that they know the answer, ask questions and ask them to problem solve with you, because that pulls them into a place of emotional maturity, and they're not just hearing it for the 400th time, and they're not just watching your example. They are now able to verbalize the logic and the rationale behind why we don't hit. And that gives them a third sensory, input and / output of learning. And that's going to help solidify that learning and that memory in their brain for the next time too. It's also going to help them feel really good about themselves. When kids are invited into the problem solving conversation, they feel accomplished. and that builds their confidence, and it makes them not want to do it next time because now they've proven, like, I know better, and like,
Yep.
I learned something and I was able to tell it to you, and it motivates them intrinsically to not do it again.
Kids like to be grown up. Look how grown up I
Yeah,
am. I'm acting like a
always.
grown up. The
Yeah.
trick when you're explaining, or the goal when you're taking the time, investing the time, I like to think of it as an investment. I'm spending time with my child here, quality time,
Mm-hmm.
for 2 minutes or 5 minutes. If they're little, or even if you're big, if they need comforting, okay, nobody thinks straight when they're upset. We got to get the upset dealt with, and not let it be a control thing. But it's like, okay, now everybody's thinking straight. The goal is to get them thinking, and then they
Mm-hmm.
then they can process themselves,
Yeah.
and then it sticks. Then it's you only have to say it 300 times, not 400.
Right. Well, I think most people would agree that you learn something faster when you experience it for yourself than if someone just
There you
tells
go.
you, like,
Yeah.
that's dangerous, don't do it. Or like, don't date, that's
Don't be bad boys.
don't date that type of person, or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, you learn things more deeply and profoundly when you learn it yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, I want to touch on a couple examples of a few different age groups here. So I tend to spend a lot of time in the 0 to 5 age group because that's where, all of this begins at birth. And so I tend to spend a lot of time in that 0 to 5 age range because if we can get in and do this inside of those years, those crucial developmental years, it sets you up for success for the rest of their childhood. But you can absolutely turn things around no matter what age your child is at, even if they're adults. There's repair and healing that can be found. So, but
Yeah.
0 to 5. So, in the 0 to 5 range, big feelings are often expressed through loud vocalizations, big body movements, tantruming, lashing out at siblings or parents. And at this age, kids have very little self control ability. They are developmentally incapable of self regulation. Um, Empathy and understanding. So we have to greet them with empathy and understanding first. So we have to address the feelings first before we can address the behavior and teach anything. Kids at this age, they have no prefrontal cortex. So they are operating in survival mode. If there's anything that we learn in 0 to 5 and you remember and take away from this is that 0 to 5 year olds are in survival mode at all times. So they are in the lizard brain, they are taking in their environment, they are scanning for danger, and they are learning what and who they can trust in the world. And is my world
Mm-hmm.
a safe place?
Mm-hmm.
And so at this age, it's all co regulation. It is all watching parents and caregivers and learning from them, and then watching how they respond to you when you have big feelings. And from that, they are going to regulate accordingly. So they're either going to regulate to your fear and your yelling and your control and your power struggle, or they're going to regulate to your calmness, your curiosity, your gentleness, your understanding. And then they're either going to learn that or they're going to learn the power struggle. So then we move into the 6-year-old to 12-year-old. I saw you write something down for that age group. Is there something you wanted to?
No, I was just making a note of the terms co-regulation. Where you're doing it together. That's an interesting. I hadn't heard that one before. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
So
that wasn't like a note to say something later.
kids at that age, they can't regulate themselves. They've never
Yeah.
learned. They don't know how. So they are running
You have to help
on,
them.
if our brains were a gas tank. And in order to, well, that metaphor died just as quickly as it popped into my head.
The thought that came to my mind was there's you'll have a new baby getting passed around, an older one. Little babies usually aren't a problem, but kids are okay as long as they're sitting on their mom and dad's lap, especially mom's lap. And then you come up and oochie woochie coochie coo, and they look at you, and then they melt down.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I didn't do anything, but it's, there's something going on. I didn't you reminded them of something or surprised them or whatever it was.
You came out of the peripherals, or you happen to just be scary to them. They've never seen someone who looks like you yet. Like they're very new. Everything's that you just grabbed their cheek, like, and they're just like, what is happening right now?
Yeah. So that's just, so mom is there, it's good to have co-regulation and say, yeah, it's okay. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
And let them calm down and try again later, maybe. I thought I liked that term, co-regulate.
Yeah. Well, so we learn how to regulate ourselves and our emotions and our nervous systems. And when something scares us or something really upsets us or whatever, like when we're born, like I said, we're in survival mode. We're trying to make sure we have a full belly. We're trying to make sure we aren't sitting in our own feces. We're trying to make sure that we get enough sleep and then anything that we visually, all the sensory intake. So the things that we touch, the things that we see, the things that we hear, things that we taste, all of those things send us signals like, you're safe, you're not safe, you're safe, you're not safe.
Yeah.
And until you get exposed to enough things in life to start to learn what's safe and what's not, you require a caregiver to give you that physical closeness and that emotional verbal feedback of like, you're safe, I'm right here. I know that was scary. It's okay. I'm right here. Like, so the empathy and the co-regulation, the physical co-regulation, as well as the verbal co-regulation. Co just means two. It just means that they're not doing it by themselves.
Leading the way.
But in order to be able to co-regulate with your child, you also have to be able to self-regulate.
That's the secret. Yeah.
And that is the hard part, right?
Yep.
So moving on to our 6 to 12-year-old kiddos. So we've been in the world for a while. We've met lots of people. Maybe we've, started going to school. We have friends. We're learning lots of things outside of the home. We're in that cognitive social area. And so big feelings are often expressed through things like arguing, defiance, negotiating, crying, or secluding themselves, internalizing their feelings, or blaming others for what happened, whatever the situation might be. So blaming mom and dad, blaming sibling, blaming friend, blaming teacher, things like that. And so generally in 6 to 12-year-olds, they know logically and rationally what to do, but their feelings are still bigger than their self-control some of the time. And so our expectation of 6 to 12-year-olds, raises, and especially there's a huge difference between 6-year-olds and 12-year-olds. But our expectations go up, right? We've co-regulated, they know in their minds what's okay and what's not, and what causes harm, and different ways of coping with different emotions. But their prefrontal cortex is still not fully developed, and they still need help and some co-regulation. And a lot of the time in this age group, that happens through curiosity questions and pulling them into the problem-solving process. So we start pulling kids into the problem-solving process when they're little, that 0 to 5 age. But this 6 to 12 the cognitive leaps that happen in 6 to 12-year-olds really start to give them that ability for rational thought and logical, an abstract, consequential thinking. So they're able to, have like a real, like almost like an adult conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the the touchy part here at this age is their ability for abstract thinking has developed, that can also mean they're now capable of starting to have things like self shame and self worth issues. And so we can cause shame and self worth issues in 0 to 5-year-olds, but in general, a 0 to 5-year-old brain is not thinking to themselves, "I'm so bad, and I shouldn't have done that." And like a little bit, it starts a little bit in that age group, but this 6 to 12-year-old age group is really when that capability, develops in the brain. And so this is.
Babies have to learn that they're separate than their parents or something, don't
Mhm.
they? There's like an age. I know it doesn't happen at a certain age for everybody, and that's why parents are so important, because the parent's the only one that really keeps track of those details in
Mhm.
development of each child. And yeah, but that the kids are unaware that they're a person for a long time
Yeah.
until they get older, and you can start to rationalize with them, start to
Yeah.
coach them that.
So that abstract thought of like, I'm me and you're you, and they're learning, that the things that I do, like how I affect the world around me. If I do this, then this happens. When I do
Mm-hmm.
that, that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really starting to like put all those pieces together. And so making sure here that we are still offering empathy when big emotions happen, we're offering empathy, we're giving understanding and saying, I hear you. That sounds frustrating. Um, I understand how you feel, validating their feelings, things like
Mm-hmm.
that. And then again, once everyone's calm and feels heard and understood, that's when we can teach. That's when we can ask
That's when teaching.
questions.
Yeah.
That's when
Yeah.
problem solving happens. And making sure that we're validating feelings without justifying behavior, but making the feelings wrong is what's going to cause that like self shame and self doubt and
Yeah.
lack of self worth.
Yeah.
Being like, I shouldn't have, that's not something to cry over. That's, there's starving kids in Africa and you have a meal on your plate. Why are you crying over not wanting to eat spaghetti? Like
Yeah.
that's going to cause major self shame issues for kids down the
Not the
road.
best approach. Yeah.
Um, yeah. So then we enter teenage years, everyone's favorite. So we're entering the teenage years, and so here, big feelings are often expressed through yelling, arguing, breaking boundaries and rules.
Yeah.
So showing that I'm independent, showing that I can do, that you can't control me, that I can make my own choices and make my own decisions.
Rebellion.
And rebellion, but it's like
They,
rebellion isn't a necessary part of being a teenager.
mm-hmm.
Make
No, I get that.
independences.
Yes, and that's the
Independence.
point I was making. I love that 6 to 12, or that when they've got your kid has developed some basic confidence. Now you're really training them, and now they're really watching you on a conscious effort. You drink beer, why can't I? And
Mm-hmm.
you start to get to really talk with them, and then I always thought of it as building competence in you guys. After a few years of that, they get to an age where okay, I know where the boundaries are and I want to be different, or whatever the motivation is. And that's, if at that point all they've been taught is do what dad does or you get a whack or whatever, if it's just uh, parents' way or the highway, and they want to exert their newfound competence, like, hey, I can drive. See you sit in the driver's seat and turn a key and hit the gas pedal. I can do that, and they'll start to act out. I guess partly for attention, but partly just to exert their independence and back to, look how grown up I am. I can do these things, and that's sometimes that turns into like rebellion. And it's better that they think about things. Up to that point, it's better if you've taught them to think about things and have a reason for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the teenage, I look at that whole age group as kind of a continuum. It's not a, there's not. I guess there's steps. You notice kids develop, and you turn around and you go, wow, I've just noticed you've grown up a lot since yesterday. So it kind of clicks in a notch. But then that whole age range from I'm a baby to I'm gone, living my own life now. That's a big continuum to me of picking up skills, picking up regulation. It's a long, slow slide, and they're all my favorite. They're all my favorite stages too. I
Yeah.
just love watching kids and seeing where they're at and doing that. I do that to kids I run into. I'm probably over parental, but I just love watching kids develop and helping them develop, and seeing how they develop differently. They get more personality as they get older.
Yeah. And you're right. It is a continuum. So I broke
Yeah,
this down for the sake of examples and people who are in the middle of parenting different age groups. But it's the skill is the same no matter how old they are. So the offering empathy and understanding and validating feelings, you have to do that no matter how old somebody is. 0, 17, 95. Everyone
that's
wants
why
their
there's value
feelings
in teaching it, is because
validated.
there's it never goes away.
But how you do that depends on the age appropriateness of different things. So in
Yeah.
18-year-olds, if all they've known is, like you said, do what dad tells you to do or do what mom tells you to do, if they've never learned intrinsic motivation or value or learned how to think about their choices, they've just been told what to do and you need to do it, then by the time they're 13 and 18 and those very natural instincts of independence and making my own choices kick in, then they're not going to know how to make good choices. And all they're going to know is that I'm going to do the opposite of whatever you say.
That's right.
Because I'm hormones and brain development, and like, it's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to start learning how to be independent, and kids are going to do what they are meant to do at the age they're meant to do it, whether you, the parent, are prepared for it or not. And so we need to stop trying to put kids into a box and make them be a certain thing, and we need to shift our parenting to accommodate who our child is. And that requires us to be regulated, emotionally intelligent people. And unfortunately, a lot of us were not raised to be regulated, emotionally intelligent, right? Because you have to be in tune with yourself in order to tune into someone else, even your own kid. Like, there's no magic. There's oxytocin and there's a bond created when a child is born, but there's no magic switch that turns on when you become a parent. You're still the person you were before that baby was born. And if you don't learn these skills and you learn how to be regulated and calm and curious, you can't tune in to the creature that your child already is.
Yeah.
And you will just go off of your instinctual survival, how you were parented, and how you're going to parent based out of your fears of what you don't want your child to be or whatever.
Yeah. Thoughtful parenting.
Yeah.
I think that's why we talked about extrinsically motivated. I'm thinking back now. That's the way I was raised. Be a good employee, work
Mm-hmm.
hard, that kind of traditional stuff, and less thoughtful, I think, is the word that popped into my head. It was more automatic. You're tired, you're working, there's limited time, there's multiple kids. It's not just you and one kid, and sometimes time is short. And it took me a long time to learn to be thoughtful in my reactions to situations. And I'm not always, it's not like I'm perfect, but um, you'll learn that if you're working for a goal, then you have to stop and think about it, and for just a second, it's like switching modes. It's like, okay, I need to get out of what I was doing right now, the urgency thing,
Mm-hmm.
and say, okay, stop. This is a parenting moment. You style before you go back. I don't know, it requires some kind of trigger or um, falling back on a goal, on a principle. I'm not sure what I'm trying to articulate here. Um, but yeah, you gotta stop and think when you're dealing with your kids, if you want to have kids who stop and think and are regulated and regulate yourself.
Well, and
Hmm.
being able to step out of the urgency when you recognize, oh, this is a parenting moment, but taking it one step further and being that person all the time. So it will serve you, the parent, to be calmer and more curious. Like you will approach the world calmly. You won't get like frantic and frustrated and overwhelmed constantly because you're letting everything around you dictate how you feel. Like if you can
Mm-hmm.
become that person all of the time or most of the time,
Much as you can, yeah.
then you will naturally parent that way. Instead of there needing to be this like switch of like, I'm going to go be this like overstimulated, overwhelmed, frantic person, but when my kid talks to me, I'll calm down. That's also
Mm-hmm.
not realistic. Like,
Yeah,
and that's,
yeah.
that's harder.
That's true. That's true.
you
That's true.
know?
And that's a learned thing. That's growth for everybody involved.
Yeah.
As a parent, you got to learn you're right. You can't just turn it on like a switch.
Yeah. So, I just want to finish off the teenage example real quick so teenagers are seeking independence, and what they want more than anything is trust. So, if you've done your job as a parent and you've taught them, this is the age where giving an inch here and there and giving them, a longer leash or however you want to put it, giving them some independence, giving them an opportunity to make choices and screw up. And like, parenting is also like, have expect failure, expect mistakes. Because if you go into parenting expecting your child to rise to the occasion and make the right choice, then you are constantly going to be disappointed in your child. And that's not fair, because I still walk out of the house and make bad choices in the morning. Like, it's like no one is perfect, and your child is still learning how to be a human being. So seeking independence and trust in the teenage years, and when they screw up, they require the same empathy, feelings being validated, understanding of their perspective about why they made that choice. Because very rarely does anyone just make a choice with no reasons behind it? There's always a reason and a feeling and a thought, and like there's always something. And maybe the way they thought about it isn't healthy or conducive to making a good choice, making a healthy choice. And so you can, through a healthy conversation, talk through their thought process instead of shaming them and punishing them. And then all they learn is to hate you instead of actually learning how to do it differently next time.
Dealing with the action and not the why doesn't teach anybody anything. You don't learn about them, what's going on in their heads. They don't learn how to make a better choice the next time. Yeah. And just the exercise of why do you think you did that? Why, what were you thinking? That promotes learning to name an emotion. Golly, I don't know why I just felt and good to start naming emotions. They get older and have words and get more mature, then it's good to teach them those skills too.
Real quick, I would ask you if you noticed what was, because you even said that there is a continuum here, right, of the 0 to 18. It's not all just like no human develops exactly at the same level, same age all the time, right? But did you notice what was the same no matter what the age group was? What was the same need in each age group?
Well, so for me, it kind of breaks down to no matter what the age is, you have to treat kids with some respect as a separate human being. They're not just somebody to be bossed around and gotten to school and gotten ready. The common thread for me is teaching, keeping things pretty regulated, so you can teach, so you can be a parent to them. Teaching how to deal with life. There's other ways to say it, but it's just teaching, passing on skills that will make them more competent to deal with what the world's going to send them, as they get older, especially after they're 18. It's all training for when they're adults.
In order
what
to
was
teach,
I supposed to notice? Yeah.
In order to teach, though, what do we have to do first?
You got to have calm. You got to have a relationship. You have to have if you look at it like a parent-child or a teacher-student kind of thing, which is kind of the way I look at it, you have to have that relationship where they'll listen. And since you're a grown-up, you're kind of in charge, especially when they're little. You're kind of in charge of creating that environment, that relationship.
Okay.
And then as they get older, you start to share it.
What creates that environment? We're getting there. This is fun.
Okay.
So in order to teach, you got to have a relationship. And in order to have a relationship, you have to have a safe environment. That's what you said. In order to have a safe environment, what creates that safe environment?
Ooh, you're trying to get me to say a specific word. The word is trust, or?
Trust is part of the safe environment.
I'm not sure. I'm self-conscious now.
When a 4-year-old is throwing a tantrum, what's the first thing you do?
Yeah.
Do you teach him a lesson?
No, you calm him down.
How?
Ooh, talk to him. You talk, you hold, you settle his nervous system. You hand him to his mother if you're not his mother. Right? Here's somebody who can calm you down.
Find an adult to handle the situation.
Immediately. I don't want to be holding someone else's crying child.
Right.
I don't know. You
validate their feelings.
Validate. Okay. That's a newfangled
So
word for me.
feelings
Yes.
first.
Yes.
Empathy,
Yeah.
lead with empathy, feelings first. We validate. We have to address the feelings before, and that is what calms the nervous
That's
system.
interesting.
The nervous
I think of that
system
with
is activated by emotions. Once we can move the emotion, whether that's through,
yeah.
hugging, holding, I hear you. That sounds so frustrating. I'm so sorry that you're feeling that. That's a big
Yes.
feeling. Just speaking to the feeling. Because sometimes kids are tantruming. They need to move their bodies and flail. You can't just tuck them in. They're just going to be like, let go.
Yeah.
They need to move the emotion. And that's okay. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that as long as
Yeah.
they're not hurting it,
Yeah.
themselves or someone else.
Yeah.
But just speaking to the emotions, speaking to the feeling, and validating it for them, no matter what age they are. So if they're 18 and throwing a tantrum, we're validating. I get how you felt that. I understand. Oh, that's so frustrating. I hate it when someone does that to me. Yes,
Yeah.
I hear you. That is instantaneously going to calm someone down and be like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I feel seen. I feel heard. You get me. You get it. Okay, we're calm. Let's talk about the behavior. Let's talk about how to handle that better in the future so that
That's
we
right.
don't
You're allowed
hurt
to
somebody.
feel anything you want. You're not allowed to act.
Yes.
If you want to get along in society, you gotta learn to not act any way you feel like, or and even then, why feeling that way doesn't necessarily mean hitting your little brother. Yeah, no, that makes a lot more sense. I think of that validation brings to me a picture of an older child, but I can absolutely see the value of teaching that at a younger age. That just didn't come to me.
Or it's life-changing at a younger age. I just want to say that to all the parents of toddlers out there, this will change your life. If you do this to your toddler, to your 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 3-year-old, 5-year-old, your kids understand so much more than we give them credit for. And validating even your infant, the research shows even in infancy, a child who, for example, hates diaper changes, if they are responded to, the diaper change has to happen, right? And so you adjust and you make it as comfortable and safe and, loving as possible. And you're gentle when you're wiping, and, maybe you get the little warmer for the wipes because they're sensitive to the cold.
Do they make those?
Yeah. But the tone and the words that you use with a 4-month-old, a 5-month-old, a 6-month-old baby while you're changing their diaper and they're upset about they've literally shown that it calms the nervous system.
Makes a big difference
and helps. It's not necessarily that the child will stop crying or stop resisting the diaper change, but the fact that you're still continuing to change their diaper doesn't cause a rip in the relationship of trust between that child and that caregiver. So saying, oh, diaper changes are hard. I know this wipe feels so cold. What is that? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And literally just verbally empathizing out loud what's happening, observing, telling them you understand in a loving tone. They've shown that the neural activity of the infant responding to those vocalizations is different and better and bonding versus a child who's screaming and mom or dad is just saying, it's okay. It's okay. It's almost over. Diaper. Oh, we got to change our diaper though. Oh, it's okay. It's all shh. Even those things that maybe we think are oh, that's what you're supposed to say to a baby. Reassuring them still is not anywhere near as effective as validating how they're feeling. Telling them it's going to be okay is not the same as saying, I hear you. This is so hard. I'm so sorry. This is so hard for you. I'm going to get you clean. And then, and describing what you're doing while you're doing it for an infant will also help teach body autonomy and body awareness. And anyway, I don't want to tangent too much into that, but.
Yeah. I remember
Yeah.
it reminds me of a story helping one of your brothers fell and hit the corner of the leg of a chair and put a split in his forehead
Hmm.
that required stitches. You could see the bone, man. And
Hmm.
ran him to the emergency room, and the doctor was like, I need you to hold him down while I clean it out and stitch it up. And
Yeah.
so, I'm sitting there laying on him. He was a big kid. But then sitting there talking to him, trying to reassure him like that,
Mhm.
um, while restraining him. I forget how old he was, 3 or 4 or 5 or something, and just
Yeah.
feeling about this tall. But fortunately, in that case, that's one case I remember instinctively trying to, like, yeah, I know this sucks, buddy. It's not going to last very long. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I get
And
that.
it's not
I
like, I
resonates.
don't want to discount reassurance. Like, give your child reassurance, especially when something
Hmm.
scary is happening. Like,
Yeah,
but it's so important to also validate that they're scared and that this is scary. This is very
you
scary. You
should be
should be
scared.
scared.
You should
Because if
be
all you're
scared. Yeah.
saying is it's okay, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, it'll be over soon, you're teaching them to ignore their feeling of being scared. And so in the
Yeah.
future, like your intuition, like when people talk about following your gut and your intuition and like listening to that internal like, hey, this isn't safe. Hey, this feels off. You
That's
know,
right.
if you destroy
Like that.
that when they're a child, if you destroy that like
Yeah.
nudge, that gut feeling and that knowledge of
Yeah.
like, this isn't right, then when they're adults, like they're gonna ignore it. They're gonna shove those feelings aside and they're gonna end up,
Yeah.
making choices based on someone else's opinion or peer pressure or whatever it might be, instead of listening to themselves and knowing what's good for them, what's not good for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That's a good point. I've heard people talk about that in the educational system, in the American education. If you quash creativity or empathy, or,
mhm,
if you quash things in small kids, then you kind of miss a window. It's hard for them to get it
yeah.
back, hard for us to get it back later in life through growth. We're still on the continuum. We're sitting here talking about it. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. There's there's a lot of years I wish I didn't, everyone is still learning. We're all lifelong learners. It's human condition, but there are a lot of pieces of this that had you known better while you were raising me, I could have spent
Yep.
a lot less time and money in therapy. Or what,
Absolutely.
like
I know. I
there are
think
many
that's true.
years spent paying for someone
Yeah.
else to teach me these things as an adult versus learning
Yeah.
them when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um,
Learning general skills to handle things life throws at you. I could
yeah,
spend, learning to deal with death, and there's just all kinds of things to learn that paying attention to your feelings and stuff will can help uncomplicate. Not that people don't have grief, but you can deal with things healthier and less healthier with
yeah,
some teaching when you're little.
yeah. Well, things are absorbed so much faster and more deeply into our subconscious from that 0 to 5 range. Things
Yeah.
become very like cognitive and prefrontal memorizing. It takes longer to learn things and takes more repetition to learn things once you hit
Yeah.
that like 6 year old and on. And it's not impossible. You can always turn things around, but it will take more effort at those
Yeah.
ages, than the natural kind of absorption type learning that happens from 0 to 5.
Inbuilt
Um,
basic stuff. Yeah. I get that.
yeah. So I just wanted to touch on, and we've kind of touched on this throughout, the way that these, using connection over control, to gain cooperation, right? Because especially in young kids, a huge part of why we end up exerting control and power is that need to do something and we just need them to do it now.
Yeah.
And so,
That urgency.
this whole episode has been about how to connect with your child in order to, one, maintain a healthier relationship, because that's the goal ultimately here, but also to gain cooperation. And this also applies in the entire family setting versus just a one-on-one parent to child. If you're using these skills as a family unit, whether it's a one parent, one child family, or a one parent, six child family, or two parents, or, whatever your family is, using these skills to remain connected no matter what the situation is going to create deeper bonds, deeper trust, and your ability to work through conflict is going to become much faster, much easier, etc. over time. And for children specifically, when they're developing these skills and you're teaching them these skills, these relational skills bleed into literally every other aspect of life. So their ability to regulate themselves is crucial to being able to handle what the world is going to throw at them throughout their life. And it's going to determine their ability to find friends and maintain friendships and find, romantic partners and maintain healthy partnerships and not end up in toxic situations, or being a
learn what to
toxic
walk away
situation,
from.
being an abusive partner, becoming a toxic partner. And it also, it actually affects IQ. So there is a correlation between emotional intelligence and IQ level, which blew my mind when I read that. And so it can actually, it's not going to be the difference between like a 90 and a 130 IQ score, but it makes
linked.
a difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes a difference. And a lot of the IQ tests, a lot of people don't know what that looks like because we're like 4 when they give us IQ tests. But I retook my IQ test, I think when I was like 18 or something. So I remember vividly what it was, and it's almost all problem solving skills.
Yeah. Yeah. It
The
measures
IQ test is problem solving. It's not a math quiz or how to spell this word. It's problem solving.
Not an achievement test.
Yeah. And so your ability to be confident and look at something and trust yourself to be like, how to look at something and go, how does this puzzle go together? Like if you have like all these self-worth issues and you don't know how things relate to each other and like you haven't made sense of the world in that way, then an IQ test your score is going to, it's going to be your ability to problem solve, which is your resilience in life.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's just constant barrage of obstacles and problem solving.
Exactly. It's all how do you play the cards that you've been dealt, whatever happens to you.
Yeah. So I just wanted to reiterate that how important this piece is. It's not just about getting cooperation from your kids. It's not just about having a happier, more conflict-free household. Like, yes, those are definitely the quality of life matters in those 18 years that you're raising a child. But it also matters for your child's quality of life for the rest of their life. And so I just wanted to touch on that before we end here. Yeah. Do you have any like final
Not really.
thoughts?
What you're saying there just triggered a thought about some years ago I read Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence book. 90s, dating myself, I think. And it hits on that too. The IQ test is a good predictor of success in school, academic success, but not much of a predictor of happiness. People who say, I'm fulfilled, or I hate that word happiness these days. It's but fulfillment and contentment and general a feeling of well-being about your life, whatever it is you're doing, and passing that on, the calmness and the relational aspect of people. If you're working with people and not, if you're not living out in the middle of the trees somewhere and you have to get along with people, EQ, your emotional intelligence, is a much better predictor of contentment or happiness in life. Not just problem solving. Problem solving is kind of limited by what you've been exposed to. Anyway, yeah, those things, I can see how those things go together, and being good at relationships, that's kind of an emotional intelligence thing, right? Directly, that's a better predictor of getting you through life happy.
Yes, 100%.
Good talk.
Awesome. What a great note to end on. Yeah. Cool. All right, friends. And if this is intriguing to you, or you want to learn more, or you want to, you're struggling with implementing this in your own parenting life, in your own family life, there are details in the show notes for how to get in touch with me. So we will see you all next week.
If someone came to mind while you were listening to this episode, or you are wishing you had a friend to digest it with, I would be so honored if you shared this link from this episode with them. I myself have always benefited from community and sharing, and I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child. Our society has become so independent from one another, and parenting these days is often a lonely journey. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's why I'm here. If you have been seeking a more intentional approach to parenting, but you aren't sure where to start, I would love to hear from you. You can find me and all of my offerings at www.jennyb.co. And come follow me on all major social media platforms. It fills my heart to hear your stories, where you come from, and your big goals for raising the next generation. And don't forget, comment your parenting question on our YouTube channel, the Relational Parenting Podcast, to get it answered on one of our future episodes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss out. I am so grateful that you are here, and always remember, you are never alone. I'll see you next week. This show is intended for education and entertainment purposes only. We will discuss things like mental health, abuse, PTSD, and other potentially triggering subjects. Please listen at your own discretion, and this podcast is not intended for anyone under the age of 18.